Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter where we review every single Best Picture nominee for the calendar year 2025. We continue on, we soldier on here, getting all the way through every single Best Picture nominee that the Academy will graciously give to us one of these days, hopefully. And so we, in our sage wisdom, have predicted this here film that we're talking about today that you clicked on, The Brutalist, directed by Brady Corbett. From this year, starring Adrian Brody, Felicity Jones.
Corbett,
Corbett.
please. Put a little zhuzh on that one.
Okay,
it's Corbett.
Brady Corbett.
Yes.
Adrian Brody, Felicity Jones, Guy Pearce.
Adrian
This is
Brody.
a long movie. It had an intermission. Tucker and I went and saw it at the theater together. We had a
Did you
nice
guys see it
time.
too?
Yeah.
Yeah,
we saw it.
Okay, I just want to check.
Yes.
And I
checked this one out.
I am excited to talk about this film with you because it's stirring up some headlines right now. There's a little bit of pot stirring on Twitter. There's all kinds of goodness to discuss here in the film. And we will determine if the film itself has a lot of goodness in it. That's the whole point of the show. Am I right?
You're right.
Sure.
Crickets.
I guess so.
Okay. Well, I've got to remind you before we do anything else of what happened in the previous episode because we talked about Edvard Berger's film Conclave, starring Ralph Fiennes, about the selection of a new pope. And, well, we thought it was pretty good. Got an 8.8 out of 10, and it ended up at the first spot on our list of the 2025 nominees. There's only 2 films on there right now. So
Yes.
we will see where The Brutalist goes at the end of the episode, so stick around for that. And now, I hand it off to Abram to quickly review a community submission, a little comment, a little mail-in from our viewers.
Yeah, for this, we're going to go back to our episode on Honora. We have a great comment here from friend of the show, host of the Every Which Way podcast,
Oh, nice.
Raina Harper. I'm an
Wait, we're friends of her show.
This
That's
is true.
true.
That's
We are
crazy.
friends
I
of her
never
show.
really
Yeah.
thought about it that way.
I was a guest of her show.
Yeah.
I will be soon.
There we go. Every Which Way's host, Raina, here says, and by the way, much better show than Quest for the Best.
Certainly covering material of greater cultural consequence. That's for
More
sure.
intrigue. The episode I watched had a chameleon that turned into a boy and hid in a young girl's room. Nothing that's
Well,
ever happened on Quest for the Best.
That didn't happen
Yeah,
in the Brutalist.
Yeah, that's fair. We are watching Titan at some point. Okay,
Yeah.
Raina says, let's get into it here. Raina says, seeing Honora in one of its first showings ever is something I will always remember. I'd like to think that that doesn't bias me too much in ranking it as my favorite movie of the decade so far.
Whoa.
Close behind it is The Worst Person in the World, Across the Spider-Verse, and as Tucker would definitely agree, /S for sarcasm, The Zone of Interest. I love hearing your various perspectives and points, good and bad, which edify me even more. Raina, thank you as always for being a great part of our community and for writing in.
Yes.
Yes.
And
That's the decade. That's high praise. That's high praise.
That's
for
high
North.
praise.
Man, we're only halfway through at this
We
point.
appreciate this. Yeah, the holy crap, Tanner. Don't even speak.
Not
like
really
that.
that impressive.
Sorry about that.
And she might be vindicated by the
That's
Oscars
true.
here in a couple weeks. We're going to
That's
find
true.
out.
Yeah, we'll see.
We will see. We're waiting with bated breath.
Yeah,
for
they're
that.
going to give out the best movie of the decade award.
5 years in. That's good.
But before they give out any awards,
Mhm.
and even before they give out any nominations, because we're still at that stage, we got to talk about
Right.
this film, The Brutalist. Tanner, would you do us a favor and describe the plot of this 3 hours 30 minutes movie?
There's no quarters, yeah.
Well, yeah,
Two
3 and 2
quarters.
quarters movie.
3 and 2 quarters, yeah.
It's a 3 and 2 quarters.
Gentlemen, this is a film about Hungarian architect Laszlo Toth. He arrives in America in, I believe, 1946 is when he arrives on Ellis Island. And as many of the Eastern Europeans fleeing World War II experienced as they arrived at the shores of America, life ain't too easy in the U.S., especially if you're an immigrant of that time. He's lucky enough, I guess, to have some relatives here. He shares a back room there in a furniture store of his cousin, or his wife's cousin, I want to say. And eventually works his way up to, or has an encounter with a very wealthy American millionaire portrayed by Guy Pearce, named, hang on, I want to get this right, Harrison Levy Van Buren.
Van Buren.
Harrison
HB.
Lee Harrison Lee Van Buren is like, hey, you're a famous architect. I want you to build me a big old building, Laszlo Toth. And he's like, well, can you bring my wife over to America too? And he's like, I'll see what I can do. And so soon, well, not soon, actually. It takes like 10 years for his wife to get there, portrayed by Felicity Jones, Erzsébet Toth, and also their niece, Zofia. Eventually, this project gets underway, and perhaps the seedier side of Van Buren is shown as he tries to take control of the project or doesn't respect Toth's vision in a lot of ways. It gets shut down. It comes back. They make a journey to Italy where something very bad happens between the two of them, and we will talk about it with the proper care and in dissection and everything like that. But ultimately, the project Laszlo and Elsebeth and Harrison have a falling out, and then we have a 10-year, or actually like a 20-year jump to the year 1980, where Laszlo is receiving an award for his work in architecture. That is the decades-spanning story of The Brutalist, told very quickly.
Well done, Tanner.
Movie could have been that long, frankly.
Could have been.
Tucker.
You did it that quick. Why didn't hey?
Yeah. What I'm feeling like offering a jump ball. Who is gonna take first dibs
Jump ball. Wow.
on this here opinion
jump ball?
giving? It's
That means
how
we
you
all
start
go
a game
for
of
it.
basketball. You got to
Uh-huh.
jump and grab the ball.
I mean, it just shows where my mind's at, you know.
I'll go
The
first.
gutter.
Abram,
Go for it,
jump
Abram.
ball.
I want to hear
Go
from
for
you, Abram.
I think The Brutalist is outstanding.
Okay.
It's a very fascinating film because as sort of the discourse around it has unfolded, it seems like there's a pretty common or at least wide trend among viewers where people adore the first half and then are sort of put off post intermission.
Mm.
And I have to say that I found myself feeling that way initially when I left the theater, and my girlfriend and I discussed the movie for a long time on the long drive home because God forbid The Brutalist played everywhere in
Wow.
America.
Yeah.
But what I think I've come to really appreciate is the deftness with which the second half, I think, formally and textually challenges the first half to kind of first illustrate this sort of archetypal immigrant story, American dream, idealism, before sitting you down for an intermission and then watching from the inside this vision crumble into the epilogue. So I think that this is a very dense, a very provocative film, and I would say certainly one of my favorites of the nominees, having seen many of them already coming into this series, and also my first of Courbet's films. I was not familiar with them otherwise, so I was really taken by it, and I think there's a lot to dig into here.
Tanner, you want to go next? You look like
I
you
want
do.
Tucker to go next.
Tucker, you can go next. Tanner, you're going last. I'm just gonna say
Sure.
it.
Okay.
Okay.
I get penalized.
I'm just sitting here neutral in the middle. Yeah, I like this movie quite a bit. I am going to stay relatively quiet near the beginning here because this is one of the longest times I've gone between watching a film and then reviewing it for Quest. And to be completely honest, a significant amount of my connection to The Brutalist has already left me, whether that is a commentary on the film's quality or my inability to retain information is maybe that's for a future Quest episode.
Yeah.
But I did like
litigate
it.
down the road.
And I am interested to explore the juxtaposition between the first and the second half because I like the second half, but I don't think I found the last act, the last 30 minutes particularly compelling because it really
epilogue,
feels like it. Yeah, the epilogue, but also like leading up to that. It feels like it just like speeds to an end really quickly for a 3.5 hour movie. And I found that a little bit jarring, but on the whole, I think it's well acted, well written, well shot, and I love the score especially. I do think it's a great movie all around, and I'm very happy that it's receiving awards for it.
I'm going to start by saying that I think this movie is a good movie, but not an excellent movie. I think that the technical elements really are in support of a fairly interesting story, and that they support it very well. Interesting cinematography, beautiful sets, good acting. Shout out to the score. Like Tucker said, I think some of these moments that are right near the beginning of the film have just a wonderfully powerful score that is just like
Yeah.
excellent. But ultimately, I arrive at my conclusion of it being good but not great in that it doesn't get far enough in its themes to me. It's a little pick up the theme ball and then drop the theme ball and then pick up a different one and then drop it. And while I think that's normally fine in art and in life because it just happens like that, we can't really control. We are working within a movie, and so I think that I sought something a little more satisfying as to what it was getting at. I do know what it was getting at, but I don't think it really finished any of its sentences. It's not like a film that like poses a bunch of questions and then refuses to answer them. I think it's more like a film that puts a lot of statements out there that then it kind of just lets trail off, and like you as the viewer are left to fill in the blanks or just to be kind of wondering there at the end. And so these notions of like America as a culture, America as a place are really throughout the film. And I think that Courbet has some scathing critique of this country illustrated in the film, but it just doesn't always work for me. That said, I do think it's entertaining. The film had a lot of good moments all the way through, and there were many different like plot devices that kept me hooked, even if I was maybe hooked on the same thing that Mr. Toft was hooked on, because I was constantly wondering about his heroin use as soon as he started doing it. It took me out of being really invested in this character because I just could not stop thinking about when the next time Old H is coming up, because you just know it's coming up next, right? You like he does it once and you're like,
Old H. Oh, that old Mr.
Guys,
Old H.
it's the lingo, okay? In Timo's circles, that's what
sorry.
they call it.
Okay, that's fair.
we call it H.
Don't laugh. It's just it's culture. It's a cultural
sorry.
thing. Come on.
So yeah,
Didn't you learn from the Brutalist that you're not supposed to judge other people's cultures?
Fair
God.
point. Fair point.
there's a lot to talk about in this film, and I want to get into many of these things that I brought up here vaguely more in detail. But on the whole, I enjoyed it. It's not the new American epic that it was kind of posited to me as. It doesn't go far enough.
Timo, I think I find myself relating the most to your statements here, especially with what you just said of like this being sort of branded as the new towering American epic, monumental, if you will.
Yeah.
And I was very excited for this movie going into it. It had easily become my most anticipated movie of the year, with a lot of the narrative rising around it. And the runtime is obviously attractive as something representing these films of old that Courbet is very much imitating or trying to harken back to, especially with his harping on him necessitating Final Cut as a director, and that is why the length is there. And this is totally and wholly his artistic vision. And I think that that's kind of the key point of where I come across The Brutalist, and where I would also say that, like, I think it's great. It is obviously an achievement in a lot of areas. And I think it is also very successful in what it is saying. But I wish it had maybe I just had these really heightened expectations for what exactly The Brutalist would be saying or being about. But ultimately, a lot of it, and listen, I love a movie that's a director making a movie about how it's about making movies, basically.
Yeah.
And I love a really long movie.
Exactly. So it's complicated for me to come out of it and say, like, I don't know, I wish there were more to it. I wish that perhaps its thematics weren't so blunt in a way, and I think there are other things that it is saying, but I just don't know if those are as fully fleshed out as what Courbet is saying about being an artist and submitting or making deals with the devil, as it were, these muddied interests that you must connect with in order to make great art, and what they in turn do to you as they extract their due as well. So yeah, I'm sure this conversation will be intellectually stimulating, and I hope that we can. I hope that my thoughts actually raise during this conversation, because I do want to love The Brutalist. I just didn't come out of the film feeling a great high on it.
Yeah, I want to start with what I think this film in its opening, near the opening, kind of after our opening scene. I forget if it's before or after the credits, right around there. When the boat with Laszlo arrives at Ellis Island, and it arrives, well, before it arrives at the island, when it's in the harbor in New York. And I really like how this moment with the Statue of Liberty is played. The theme of this movie is very eloquently conveyed in 3 shots.
It's just right there.
It's just right there. You arrive in America, and how do you choose to show the Statue of Liberty as a director? It's upside down. And so that immediately, I think, while I didn't catch this as a viewer watching, I didn't go like, oh, America upside down, something up with this. I was like kind of taken aback, and it's a huge music swell. This key shot serves as a visual thesis statement for what I think this film is getting at least in my reading. Tanner, you said some things about like artistry and working with the man, the business, and that it does have some stuff to say about which I connect with, being an artist and having to work for the man to make my art come through. That opening bit, though, with the Statue of Liberty sets us up for a very interesting deconstruction of the American myth, which is what I think the kind of earlier parts of the film are dealing with, talking about how as an immigrant, Laszlo is not appreciated. He's a foreigner. There's xenophobia, and how the idea of America is really just a dream and really doesn't exist, which is a theme we've trodden on a lot. But I think it does go to the point of being like, this is beyond a dream, right? If we think about like the idea of the American dream, it had existed before World War II, but like our modern American, Courbet's probably modern American mindset of like where the American dream comes from is like this specific time period. The post-war economic boom is where we as Americans gain all of our material riches. And this film really, I think, goes to prove that that is not how it was for most people. And that idea of our collective dream never existed. It wasn't just that it's unattainable, that it never even existed to begin with. And it all begins there with the Statue of Liberty being upside down.
Yeah, that's where I kind of come at, because obviously this opening sequence, well, I shouldn't say opening sequence. A lot of people in writing about this movie say like the opening sequence where Laszlo is on the boat to Ellis Island. That's not the opening sequence.
Yeah.
The opening shots of this movie are of Zofia, I believe it is, in like being interrogated by German soldiers in a concentration camp. In the bookends of this film, the very bookends, that very first shot and the very final shot, I think are very interesting to a specific reading that I hope to at least touch upon, because I don't have it fully formed myself. But anyway, this moment that you're talking about, Timo, the ostensible like the brutalist is here. Here it is in all of its grandeur.
Because like
we're doing a shaky cam as he like squeezes through all the all the likewise immigrants coming to America. He's apologizing as his letter to Elizabeth is being read out, and then we get the brutalist theme, basically the as he emerges and sees America for the first time, and it's not the bright shining city on the hill. We're flipping that. Where the Statue of Liberty is all cattywampus. And then he is onto the dingy streets of New York and hits up a brothel and gets a failed sexual encounter with a prostitute there before going to Philadelphia. Yeah, I mean this is how the movie announces itself. And obviously there are further themes here, but like the wonderment of Laszlo being there and trying to glom onto this dream are there from the very beginning.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's interesting because I feel as though while the images are certainly condemnatory or are signaling in their sort of inversion of these great icons, the Statue of Liberty is certainly thematically quite rich. I feel as though the difference in the first half of the film and the second half of the film, I really think in my viewing, is how Laszlo feels about the opportunity in front of him. And if he yet views the Statue of Liberty in this askew way or not.
Mm-hmm.
I will also just note, before getting deeper in here, I looked up to see if he was real. I didn't want to Lydia tar myself again.
Oh, I was so when I saw this with a couple of friends on over the weekend, and as we were driving away, I said, I wonder if we can get Abram again. I wonder.
I had to.
Okay.
Y'all could have gotten me. Y'all could have gotten me because I didn't look it up.
Because Jean asked me walking into the theater, like, is that a true story? And I was like, oh, they're not going to get me again.
Oh, man.
So I think what's interesting about the construction of this character is that he's obviously arriving in America under duress.
Uh-huh.
We know this. We know that he's a refugee. We know that both he and his wife were in separate concentration camps. And that in his mind, Elizabeth is probably dead.
Erzsébet, by the way. There's no L. Erzsébet.
Erzsébet. Okay.
Yes.
We're trying to Americanize it, but you can see like the Americanizing roots of their names. You know, Sophia, Erzsébet. You can like your mind like tries to go to incorrect them.
I'm just
Americanize them rather.
And it's also, I mean, it's an important point because obviously Erzsébet or Elizabeth are names that have very different connotations, and this becomes important with the Van Burens and the second half of the narrative, and all the characters are reunited. But I think, to what I was suggesting earlier, there is some kind of view still in Laszlo in this early part of the narrative that this American myth is still real. I think that the literal plot progression of that first half illustrates it. The way that he arrives, has this great opportunity, loses it, and through his work, through his merit as an architect, is noticed and finds this opportunity for this like almost aristocratic lifestyle with the Van Burens and this employment that's thrust upon him. It's more complicated than that, obviously, because we learn as we meet his cousin who runs a furniture shop.
Yes.
That his cousin has largely rejected his cultural roots and now goes by Miller and has a Catholic wife.
A Gentile wife, after all. Yeah.
I think that first half is really loaded with
us, you know?
loaded with these interesting tensions between on really a plot level, and I think in Laszlo's mind to some extent, illustrating this story, this American story as we know it, as sort of a positive archetype, before Laszlo himself realizes, as we realize as viewers with the askew Statue of Liberty, that there is indeed something darker and less true about the story.
The American dream is more of an American nightmare. Am I right, fellas?
Whoa. Okay, Mike.
There's a moment that I think, I want to talk about Laszlo's characterization and Brody's performance, but I want to give you the floor if you have any thoughts on like these opening sort of sequences here.
Honest God truth is you guys covered it very thoroughly.
Okay.
What else could I say? I think you guys are right.
Fair point. So the moment I want to talk about, Abram, you mentioned Alexander Nivola, I believe is the actor's name. He was Alessandro Nivola, who is, of course, in the other great film of 2024, Kraven the Hunter.
Oh my God, he's the Rhino.
He's the Rhino.
Oh my God. I thought I'd seen his face somewhere.
Yes. I
thought I'd seen that man go.
he plays Attila or Attila or something like that.
Something like that.
Along those lines. And they have this furniture store, and when Laszlo shows up there and they show him like his room essentially, which is like a back storage room off of the furniture show floor, there is a moment that is almost kind of imperceptible in Brody's performance, but I think I want to know if you guys picked up on it, or he's going through the motions of being like, thank you very much. Obviously, you're too kind. I couldn't ask you to do anything more. But there is a underlying sort of resentment maybe isn't too strong of a word, but like give me a shitty back room to sleep in. Like, come on now. Like, there is not the wide-eyed like, oh, how lucky I am to be in America. At least from these very opening scenes, he's like, this shit's gonna be tough. Like, I don't want to be doing this. I was a very celebrated architect back in my home country, and I'm here by necessity. Like, only necessity is why I'm here. So it's not like there's not a romanticization from these opening minutes either, even on the part of Laszlo's characterization.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
Well, I think that's why he's an interesting character and an interesting subversion of the, I guess, stereotype of someone arriving to America and trying to work their way up into greatness. We've seen many films, even especially on our Best Picture reviewing series, about that exact topic. But I like that Laszlo is an experienced person. He is someone who has had his whole history. He is middle-aged already. He has gone through the trials and tribulations of going to university and becoming famous, and he's worked for decades at this point. But we don't learn about that until later, and so he just feels like he is weary and world-worn when he shows up in this place. He's been separated from his wife. He's in an unfamiliar area. And I think that reframes this narrative, especially because he's so quiet for that first hour of the film, maybe even more. It isn't until he really gets like the full job to build the Brutalist compound, the Van Buren compound, that he opens up and starts, like, his emotions start pouring forward in all sorts of different ways. But he is a very quiet but also world-aware person. He's had this whole experience, and so I found him very intriguing from the beginning, because I'm like, what's on this guy's mind? And I didn't really pick up on what you're saying about his reactions to that moment, but just because I found him so enigmatic at the beginning, because I'm like, I don't know a lot about this guy. I don't know how he's feeling about this, and he's not saying a lot about anything in that first part of the movie. And so it's just we're watching the film watching him discover this world along with him. We're not really seeing it through his eyes, I don't think, because he is he's a very enigmatic character at the beginning, very mysterious. You don't really know what his viewpoint on this is yet.
Should be noted that, Tucker, thank you for using that word, because the first part of this of the film is called The Enigma of Arrival.
It is. Yeah. What is it? Do you remember what the second part is called?
The second part is The Hardcore of Beauty.
Well, there's an interesting thing about his background as well, which is obviously he is, as we learn a little bit later on in that first half, he's an extremely renowned architect.
Yes.
But he's coming to America here as a refugee of the Holocaust and of the war in Europe, which is obviously not experienced in America anything like it is in Europe, particularly not if you're a victim of the Holocaust, of course. So he's coming with that context, but he's also coming with this notion that his legacy no longer exists. Because we have this moment when he's sitting down with Van Buren over lunch, and he's shoveling coal, because we learn shortly prior in the narrative, he says, I would never let my family see me grovel. He has to work. And so he finds this work. And then we have this interesting dynamic where Van Buren is reverent of his architecture once he finds out who he is. And Laszlo's reaction is quite interesting in that he gets choked up when he sees images of his buildings.
Yes.
He thought, the images at least, because we come to learn later that he was very assured in the literal foundations of his building. He thought that the images and thus sort of the cultural history of his legacy had been entirely erased, and that he was, in fact, in America, yes, as a middle-aged person, but in some ways as a new person, a person whose old life had been gone.
That potentially his. Well, does he think that Erzsébet is dead? Does he think that, because they're communicating via letter?
No, he's not. No, they're not, because the letters are arriving to Attila. He never reads them until he arrives in America, and Attila gives him the letters.
That's what you're talking about. Okay,
yeah, and that's that moment when he gets off the bus when he tells Attila tells Laszlo that he has received a letter from Erzsébet, and he's just crying and like rubbing his hands on his face and like just like completely broken over that moment.
Yeah, I mean,
in a good way, I guess.
A strong performance moment for Brody. But yes, the point that we're talking about in the narrative, he knows that Erzsébet is alive.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And then we get into I want to talk about Van Buren, unless we have more to say about Laszlo up to this point in the film. But I mean, obviously his relationship with Van Buren is key to the entire film.
It is our kind of duo that leads us through, both gives us our conflict for the film, but then provides lots of comic relief, and then also has it's the backbone of the plot. So yeah, Van Buren. I mean, I think that he's a very interesting character. First off, I like how he speaks. I think that the ways the writing for this character is so very intentional and gratifying to listen to, because he sounds like he's, I don't know, what's 1940? He sounds like he's speaking in 1880s English. He sounds like he's straight out of a bygone era. He does not talk like the other people in the film do. And that immediately clues me into this like haughty and bourgeois perspective that he's got. Which then makes all the things that he does all the more interesting, because, you know, I think that, like, well, he could be anything. He is unbridled by worldly concerns because he has so much money, and so his opinions and his actions, and it's all just like, it could be whatever. And so that initial flip where it's like he hates the design of this room, which when I saw that reveal of the room, I was like, man, the father is gonna hate this. And and then to the flip where he's like, I'm a man. I want to be a man of the future, and we see these like newspaper clippings. Well, what that puts in me is a thought that none of that enjoyment on Van Buren's part is genuine. Is that it's actually all for appearances and to get newspaper clippings of him being a forward-thinking individual, because that would be good for business. When in reality, he probably actually doesn't like it very much.
It's this thing that I like about the characterization of Van Buren, that he is all about appearances. Like, he almost has no interiority to him. We get one moment where he talks about like this encounter that he had with his adoptive mother's parents, which is very key to like who he is at his core, which is a very like punitive and petty man. But otherwise, he is all about appearances. As Timo was just mentioning there, like, you get this impression when he has this lunch conversation with Laszlo that he's like, I hated the room, but then my high society friends came over and thought that the room was really cool. So now I want to be friends with you, and I want to enjoy it, and also I want you to build something else for me. Yeah. That is 100% the impression that you get from him. And you know, I think perhaps the best scene in the entire movie is one that I referenced earlier when we were opening this up, when I said I hope our conversation here today can be intellectually stimulating. It's when he has that conversation with him, when Laszlo has he kind of says, you know, my buildings are meant to stand the test of time, forego such erosions as the war and so on. And Guy Pearce just kind of comes back with that. I find our conversations intellectually stimulating. You kind of have this impression that he doesn't have a whole lot to add himself. He is an empty shell who, you know, made it big with the wartime manufacturing gig, and is now a very wealthy man and wants to make his lasting impression on the world, as do many rich and wealthy people. They do these things to have them convince themselves that they are important as the amount of money that they have should suggest.
Y'all must forgive me as I keep this fire going, else you'll see me turn into a block of ice during the episode.
I want to look at that moment when they properly meet in the cafe as the beginning of, I think, a particular strand of their relationship that complicates my thematic reading of this film. Because we're talking about how, you know, there's no shortage of films we cover on this show that are interested in the deconstruction of the American myth, the American dream, the immigrant story. I think what the spin that the Brutalist is trying to take on it is buried in the relationship between these two characters. And when they're speaking in the cafe, it is the relationship between this, and I really like your framing of him, Timo, as this old world, rich, archetypal American magnate who has.
He's got that like Vanderbilt. He's got that Rockefeller kind of
here's my
vibe
thing.
to him.
I have to interject here is that he's not old money. Is that he's putting on the appearance of being old money, but he is, especially by the 1956 or whatever, he is new money.
100%, but nonetheless, he thinks he's in that kind of tradition.
Yeah, okay.
The reason, and I think, Tanner, that's a very key point you bring up, because his political and cultural instability, the airs he puts on, are key because he meets Laszlo as this foreign artist that he can unearth and that can be his. And then as the film goes along, there's an erosion of that as Laszlo begins to regain more and more of what was his before the war. And we come to learn, I think, to your critical distinction, Tanner, that the Van Buren legacy is built on shifting ground.
Yeah.
And we have this character
and perhaps
in Laszlo.
Other people's work, as case in point, Laszlo.
No.
And so we have this.
Don't
this
make
man
me get
who
the books that are up there.
He, by his own admission, doesn't create. And so he's jealous of Laszlo in some way. And his claim to Laszlo is the fact that he pulled him out of this position as a coal miner or a coal shoveler. And I think it's important, and obviously we'll touch on it more in the second half of the film, it's important the type of architecture that Laszlo is participating in. This brutalism.
It's the title of the movie.
Yes.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that was the title of the movie.
Basically, and I'll get more into this as we get into different parts of the film, but my general opinion on how this is a more complicated version of this deconstruction narrative is that we're looking at this this figure who is running out of time in Van Buren, who is being faced by this immigrant figure who is quickly gaining a cultural cachet and significance that he can no longer control, and what it means for Van Buren to lose that control, and what it means for Laszlo to be under the thumb of somebody who wants to keep his thumb there as hard as he possibly can. The architecture plays a key role in this. Their different cultural backgrounds play a role in this, and I think the clear shift in Laszlo's confidence in the second half of the narrative also plays a key role in this as we watch this progression from that scene in the cafe where he is dirty and downtrodden and simply in awe of the fact that images of his work remain. That's a far cry from the figure who
is
Van Buren
like bossing around people
who has that
site.
amazing scene where he chews out the other architect.
Oh yeah, dude, that's so good.
You don't need an owned bell. You need like an owned gong. You need like the amount of ownage in that scene is so large. You need
bring out the air horns. He got him.
He got him.
100%. And just the last thing I'll say to end that is I think the way you get the power dynamic that moves Van Buren from the position he holds over Laszlo when he slips across the money to the point where he has to sexually assault him to assert his dominance at the end of the film is key, I think, to what this movie is trying to say about this dynamic in America between immigrants,
the people who own and the people who own and the people who make.
100%. But I also think there is a very particular cultural element to it that surpasses the idea of filmmaking or artistry as well.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's a fascinating power dynamic that we watch grow and evolve over the course of the film, especially in that second part of the movie, because as I was mentioning, I found Laszlo a very enigmatic character at the beginning, but especially once you hit the intermission, we get the time jump and Erzsébet and Sophia arrive. He is much more confident. He is much more outspoken. He's
been doing heroin for a number of years, so
that's true. Yeah, which really boosts your confidence levels. But he still is throughout the entire film very meek in front of Van Buren. And so I think what this movie really shows, I think the strongest part of this movie is watching him go from someone who is quiet and reserved at the beginning of the movie and is willing to, do what it takes or not literally shine shoes, but figuratively shine shoes and do the hard work up until we see him nearing the end of the movie where he has a cushy job in a clean office and he's chewing out other people and yelling and screaming and like his full confidence has been like unleashed as he's gotten that taste of that power. And so I think this movie is also very much about power corrupting and the way that we see people step on the heads of others to get to where they need to. And even by the point where we've seen Laszlo go through the trenches to work his way back up. He is also, once he has a taste of that power, willing to step on the heads of others to maintain his appearances as a member of society and as a talented artist and things. And so I think that's a really interesting dynamic, especially as it plays into Van Buren and Toth, like never really actually coming to head together because he's still feels as if he's like has to put on the appearances of being meek in front of Van Buren. I think that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that like Van Buren has a pathological need to be the dominant figure in any circumstance. Sure. It's like it's I don't know, it's kind of unexplainable beyond that. Like where the film ends with the rape scene, like that really solidifies this. Like Van Buren will do whatever he thinks is necessary in order to maintain his position as the guy in charge. And that is definitely challenged by Laszlo, who I think is a contrasting character. His pathological need is to be in control of his art and to be like a master of his domain. And so those two things cannot coexist when it comes to building this cathedral, library, gymnasium, theater, community center. Holocaust memorial, as it turns out, we learn in the epilogue. Those, I think, a great part of the conflict of the film comes about these two very distinct, very strong character motivations, really, that are not explored because they almost don't need to be. Like the archetypes of these characters, I don't need the film to humanize Van Buren and tell me why he must be in control all the time. I mean, we get some of this idea of his the relationship with his mother, but we don't get that for Laszlo really, where it's like, why does he need to be an artist? It's, I don't know, it's self-explanatory in every movie.
It's because I don't know. We have much more in common with an artist than we do the capitalist American moneyed interest. So we just on a base level relate to Laszlo and his struggles and his struggles against being corrupted or overwritten by this very wealthy man who, again, like I said, like his whole motivation is basically just turning his material wealth into some sort of lasting image in the world. Or even like his relationship with others. As you've been saying, Timo, he feels compelled by the nature of his wealth to be the most powerful, domineering force in any room, in any given scenario, because he has the money. And so in his mind, he has to, in turn, be that important.
He has to like fill the shoes
that wouldn't
of the
mean
money.
anything.
Yeah, and in most situations, he is like by default that, and so he can act like he's not in charge when he really is.
Everyone else recognizes that he's the richest guy in the room, so we must all listen to him. He must be the richest, the most powerful guy here.
And Laszlo pushes back against that, so it's probably how that ends up. The rape ends up happening at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, far be it from me to try to divert away from a class reading of the narrative.
All right, here we go.
Give us another perspective. No, do it. I want to hear it. I love to.
There's a really important scene, I think, when Laszlo is showing off his plans for this megastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing it in front of a group of people in the town.
Doylestown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the people of Doylestown are here to, in some ways, protest Laszlo. And
Can I sidebar the films when the film like makes the claim that like Pennsylvania is like the most powerful and most important state in this country, and then like it's in 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's fair. That's a fair point.
I'm not gonna argue with it. I would like it to change,
Different
but
reasons,
I'm not
different
gonna,
reasons.
different reasons, but same outcome. Continue, Abram.
We come to learn that there is this suggestion or it's a question box where people of Doylestown can put in questions, and as Laszlo stands in front of them, and he remarks that a lot of them have nothing to do with the building. Indeed, a lot of them have to do with his identity as this foreign immigrant.
He calls himself a foreigner, right? That's kind of...
He calls himself a foreigner.
I think that's how the film is trying, and that choice of word is, that's how he's positioned. As opposed to a Jew, as opposed to an immigrant, he is a foreigner.
It's 1956. He is from Eastern Europe. The Cold War is beginning to heat up, and the building style brutalism itself is already taking on a connotation of being a communist, socialist style of architecture.
Yeah, and so he, his obviously his identity as Jewish is also intrinsic to the narrative.
Yes.
It becomes even more important in the second half, I would argue. Yes. But I think its suppression in the first half is important in this scene, because we come to learn that sort of the central fixture of this building is this cross.
Mm-hmm.
Laszlo,
because
who has
of state funding, right? They can get more money for the building if they put the chapel in there, and it has to be some arbitrary percentage chapel.
we come to, well, what it is it can't be a token gesture. It can't be a prayer room.
That's right. He's
as we learn.
Yeah. It has to be a meaningful addition to the building. And then Laszlo in response says, well, what does that mean?
I mean, what it ends up meaning in practice is that Laszlo builds this incredible monument to Christianity with this cross that invokes this relationship between Christianity and nature. It is the movement of the sun is intrinsic to the reverence that people are going to feel from the sun beaming through this structure to illuminate the cross in the room below on this big marble plinth. As he's explaining this, after he has defended himself as a foreigner and as a Jew, he stands up with this flashlight and shows how this sort of symbol of Christian reverence is going to be the fixture of this building. And we look, and the camera moves, and we move from him, and we look at the Van Burens in the back of the room. And they're not in the crowd, they're overseeing in the back.
Yeah.
And so I think that what we're seeing here is this man whose art is which is not intrinsically Christian. Indeed, his work in the past, when it has been religious, has been in building synagogues. He has been harnessed by Van Buren to make this reverent Christian monument. And I think that that's another way in which control is exercised culturally, artistically, and to your point from earlier, financially over Laszlo.
An artist being sort of railroaded into making something that appeals to a larger audience that will, for moneyed interest, for financial reasons, maybe trying to...
2 for them, 1 for me?
Potentially, and also, as we learn at the end of the film, sneaking in his own under the radar, literally under the foundations things that is more meaningful to him.
Yeah.
I wonder what film director Brady Corbet could be trying to indicate with this structure, with this being the key conflict of the film. I don't know.
Maybe I'm just brain farting, but I don't know what you're trying to do.
I'm going to bring up a film comparison here.
The structure is filmmaking. I mean,
Oh, okay. I thought you were trying to name a filmmaker.
No.
Oh, himself, I guess.
I'm gonna name a filmmaker
okay,
and a film.
I'm
gonna do it. Citizen Kane. This movie is I think heavily influenced and at least in kind of what it's trying to do, and how it's going to tell this narrative. I think that this film and Citizen Kane have a lot to come in to compare.
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, I got to give every point to Citizen Kane because I don't think that our character and the storytelling in this one really comes close to rivaling Citizen Kane, but it is whatever.
Fair.
I digress. It's on that like Sight and Sound list every
But you can put that
decade.
on,
So
put that on the poster. It's no Citizen Kane. Taylor Nelson. I was like, yeah.
I guess not.
I mean, yeah. Like, I don't know, man.
I think we sort of hit the point where the divide in the film is, right? Where the intermission is. There is of course the Jewish immigration lawyer that Van Buren is friends with, who sort of helps bring, sort of grease the wheels a little bit to get Erzsébet and Zofia over to
the
America.
Jewish immigration lawyer who is also the lawyer for the vice president.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes,
or the firm is the lawyer for the vice president.
Yeah. And then then we hit our 15-minute intermission as they need like proof of them being connected, in fact, to get them over. And then there's a time jump, and Erzsébet is there. Felicity Jones has arrived. It's crazy to think that she is only in like the back half of this movie. And so we've talked plenty about Laszlo and Harrison Van Buren. What do you guys make of Erzsébet as a figure in this film? And by extension, I guess Felicity Jones's performance as well.
Well, it's a complete, not a complete, but a fairly complete inversion of our power dynamics before. We have the film, as we've been talking about, this power dynamic, and that's where the struggle of the film's conflict's coming from. But here we have established characters that have been apart from each other for a long time, that know each other very well, and that we soon see are quite equal. And so Laszlo, being away from that and in this very hierarchical, very like code switching, play to the right person in the right moment, now has to deal with Erzsébet being around, who is his equal, who's smart, independent. They are a loving couple and they care for each other a lot, but they don't need each other, and they survived without each other for a very long time. Post their love blossoming as a married couple. And so her arrival, I think, challenges the hierarchy of who's in control, because previously it's just Van Buren is in control. And, Laszlo's got to fight against that to get what he wants, to get his concessions and whatnot. But
Laszlo has somebody in his corner.
Now Laszlo has somebody in his corner, but also somebody to worry about. And so there's both the benefit and the negative of having Erzsébet around. And so I think that's where you enter in this romantic element to the film, which we're playing around the edges of in the first half, but we really dive into in the second. And I do like it. I think that they have a really natural chemistry. I totally believe that these two people are together, and that they are right for each other, and that they are in love with each other. That we have these moments where they're in the bedroom together and they're discussing, and we have the moments where Erzsébet's osteoporosis is causing her immense pain, and the family is trying to figure out what to do about that, and it's just a moment of natural tension and natural struggle that arises, in which the love for each other is shown. And so it's, in some way, the companion, I forgot what his name is, but the black guy that Laszlo ends up befriending, Gordon, that's his name. Gordon befriends at the homeless shelter, and then eventually pulls strings to get him hired on the project. And I almost see like that relationship as being the one that Erzsébet replaces almost, because we don't really see him a ton in the later part of the film. And this cooperative and understanding relationship, as opposed to a hierarchical and dominant one.
Yeah, I think that the dynamic between Erzsébet and Laszlo is, for me, the most interesting part of the film, and the way that it characterizes Laszlo, especially by this point in the film, and by this time in Laszlo's life, he has spent years in America. He has established himself. He has built this. He's literally built things. His dynamic with the Van Burens has already been established for a long time. I think it's a really interesting note to show when we come back from the intermission, him going alongside Van Buren's daughter and the Jewish couple that helps them get Erzsébet back. Like, it's the four of them going, which I think is an interesting note. But to me, that quickly established, like, okay, this time jump has not only happened, but he is comfortable with these people. He's comfortable enough knowing them enough to have them come along with him to this big moment, like one of the biggest moments of his life, to have his wife come back, even over his cousin and even family that don't come with him. But what makes it so interesting is there's been this tension building. I think you're right, Timo, of the longing, the separation, the long distance concern between the two of them, and the letters, and the fear of like what did happen to them. I don't know. I haven't seen them in so long. But as Erzsébet shows up, and as the film progresses into their relationship, as is now after a long gap apart, I find it very fascinating because I think Laszlo struggles to have her back. I agree that they care very deeply for one another, but I do think that Laszlo has changed a lot, and I think Erzsébet notices the ways in which he's changed, and in the ways in which his identity now as someone who has immigrated and has had a life set up in America drives a wedge between them in the way that they don't fully reconnect. They have a very hard time in basically every sequence, like genuinely connecting to one another, because they have different goals, very different experiences at this point in their life, and it's not a they're back fully supportive of each other relationship. It is unsteady, and it is awkward, and it does have these multiple wedges driven into the cogs, and I find that really, really compelling, especially as it relates to the power dynamic, as you guys were mentioning, that Erzsébet has some power over Laszlo, and does tell him to do things sometimes, and doesn't take his shit sometimes, and he doesn't like that sometimes, and I find that tension really compelling, because it's not all sunflowers and butterflies, even in the married relationship. It's like lots of shit has gone on, and they have changed as people. And while they are still holding on to that connection that they have, it can never be the same. And I think that's really, really compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. I just want to zoom out to 4,000 feet for a second. What did you think of the intermission?
Oh, sure.
That it happened?
Yeah, just as a
I love
device in the filmmaking.
I love an intermission.
Big thumbs up.
Big thumbs up.
It.
I love an intermission.
We got to refill our sodies.
We got to go refill our sody cups, and we took a walk, went outside, had some time to just kind of discuss what was going on with the movie, went back in, zoned out on my phone for like 5 minutes, and then the movie started up again, and it was like, I don't know. I have uncritical praise for an intermission. If you're gonna do a movie like this, if you're gonna do a movie that's this long, give us an intermission. I don't see why you wouldn't do it unless you've written a narrative that is so continuous for so long that you can't break away from it. Yeah. But I don't know, like, your artistic drive has to be so great to do that, because it's detrimental to your audience. I think it improves my watching experience, bar none, to have an intermission like this.
Yeah, I would say for this film, what I always defer to is like does the structure of the film allow for it? Like, yeah,
that's what I was kind of getting at.
I wouldn't put an intermission in like Oppenheimer, for example, even though I think that interestingly they are comparable films in that they are these 3-hour historical epics of differing scales, I would say,
of manly creation.
But they are these 3-hour historical tales, both of which move at honestly quite a clip, and that's something that we haven't really said at this point in the review, is that
quite a bit happens in this here movie.
Quite a bit happens in this here movie, and also this thing moves and shakes, and like it doesn't really drag. It's not slow paced in the film for me. It's not slow paced at all, and
we're in and out of scenes.
I think the intermission can lend itself to that, and also obviously the structure of the film having this 10-year time jump also lends itself to having that intermission. So I'm totally in favor of this being a more regular sort of thing, especially if we can get more of these gargantuan length films made to sort of break it up, because I think it does allow the audience time to digest a little bit, both literally and the contents of the film.
A little meta-wise, the actual content of the intermission. The intermission is not just a black screen. It is a countdown timer, and it is the photo that proves that Erzsébet and Laszlo are married, and that Zofia is part of the picture too. And that's what we leave on, and that's for most of intermission, but it's not all of intermission. When we're getting back, when the filmmakers estimate that most people will be trickling back into the theater, it changes, and we get a soundscape change because we have this nice, lovely kind of city ambience dot wave kind of playing underneath the thing. Then you have the building. You see the building kind of rapidly progress and change and construction continue, which then propels us right into because then I go, oh, so we've made progress in this one area of Laszlo's life, and now we're being shown progress in the other. And now my mind is full of questions about what has happened in the interceding time, which then the film answers, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of actually exactly why I wanted to raise the question. As just a personal note, I like the intermission. I was at the Alamo in Seaport in Boston. I can't fucking believe you didn't have shakes that day. Staff of the Seaport Alamo in Boston who's listening right now.
It's because they laid off 25% of their workers, Abram.
That's true. They got bought up by a fucking private equity company.
These
moneyed interests, getting their sticky fingers in artistic ventures.
And the only reason they didn't
that they made about this.
They didn't lay off my roommate because he had availability. It was because he was being open. Otherwise, if you would have said he was kind of not available on some days, they would have canned his ass. Evil. That shame. Who they didn't
lay off was the guy who specifically comes around and puts too much oil in the pepperoni pizza. He was not laid off.
Oh, good. Well, that's good.
But I will note that I like the Alamo on the whole. I just, the food situation, the fries, as always, were phenomenal. They were terrific. But the rest of the food, it just was subpar.
This is a little intermission from the content of talking about the movie.
The reason I wanted to ask the question...
I hope we're not only halfway through this review.
The reason I want to ask the question is because of what Timo said, and because it connects into sort of where I agree with Tucker in a general sense, which is the second half of the film is a lot heavier in I think every sense of the term. I think that the script is heavier. I think that obviously the events of the plot are heavier. I think that the emotional charges between our characters are heavier, and I think that editing in every respect, you feel the filmmaking more. And I want to talk about that because I think that the second half is where a lot of the really interesting stylistic moves come in. But as it relates to Erzsébet and Zofia arriving, it's a very mature and aged relationship between them. I think that the moment when they're laying in bed is an incredible performance moment for both Brody and Jones, as Jones is giving him a hand job and he's crying and she's like overcome with this emotion. And then we have these two people who don't quite know how to fit together literally in the same bed. And it's been so long, and they've contacted each other through dreams.
Yes,
it's very interesting. The second
Felicity Jones or Erzsébet is saying this thing of like, I know what you've done, indicating that like she knows that he was being exploring sexually with other women in the 10 years that they were apart, and she posits that yes, I was even with you in all those moments, and I forgive you of those moments.
Yeah, it's a very hard scene to watch, I think, and I think it sort of assigns this more poetic quality to the second half of the movie, which I think can be off-putting. I think a lot about just sort of prior us talking in the second half. I think about the interesting like over shots where Laszlo's opening the blinds in his apartment and we have multiple images overlaid on top of each other, or the strange ways that his building, this megastructure, becomes labyrinthine.
Yes.
And the editing choices starting to feel very noticeable and very apparent, and you feel both this poetic quality, this more heavily formally experimental quality, but also this sense at the core of Laszlo's character that things are starting to go really wrong. And I find that, and I think the reason that so many people point to a difference in opinion between the first half and the second half is that I think if you told me that like two different people wrote or directed these halves of the movie, I'd kind of believe it.
Sure.
And I think it's a testament to the strength of the direction and the writing that these two halves feel disparate, but feel, in my view, so clearly in conversation with each other.
Yeah. So, Abram, I mean, you mentioned that it's almost as if two different people wrote the two different halves of the movie, and
True.
It's not true, but it is true to a certain extent, because we've been lumping a lot of praise, the auteur theory, onto Brady Corbet, but it should be noted that his partner Mona Fastvold also wrote the film with him. The
You mean partner, like creative partner, like romantic partner?
both. They
Snyders.
Mix
Just like
everything
the
in one
Russos.
pot, why don't you?
Exactly. They wrote the film together. And I think that that female perspective is present in the characterization of Ersebet. And people have been dismissive of both the second half of this film and Jones's performance. I think that she is good. I was hoping that we'd maybe transcend a little bit more out of like the wife of the great man, as we've seen in many of these historical stories of this kind and this type. I think we do slightly. I think that she has a bit of a different characterization than like your Emily Blunts in Oppenheimer, for example.
She's pretty complex as a character.
There is complexity to her, of course. She has her own scenes, her own sort of dynamics with Harrison Van Buren, and she can be a little bit snarkier towards him than Laszlo can be. I think they both recognize his sliminess and his like underhandedness when he's making these so-called generous offers to them. But she can be a little bit more, serving it back to him in her own way. And then of course you have the final confrontation that she has with Harrison. But if we want to continue moving through the film,
I think you mentioned something that I agree is a criticism that I have of this movie, is not giving Erzsébet more of a focus in that second half. I do think that as she shows up, we get a lot of her, but there is a chunk of the movie, I guess, as they're sort of feeling distant. It makes sense if this movie's from the perspective of Laszlo that she kind of shifts to the background for a chunk of that second half of the film. But I do think there is a lot of narrative potential there that I thought was sort of set up by these sequences that she does have, where it's just her and Van Buren, and the idea of her pursuing her own career and having her own dynamic with him, and doing things outside of the purview of Laszlo. I think she's such an independent, strong, interesting character that I wanted to see her have 2 or 3 scenes with Van Buren. I wanted to see her go to work for the first time and learn how to explore and exist in American culture. I think that there's a little bit of a missed opportunity with how powerful Felicity Jones' performance is, how interestingly written Erzsébet is as a character, to not balance the screen time between Laszlo and Erzsébet a little bit more in that second half. Because I think thematically and textually and character-wise, there's so much to work with there that I think it's sort of sandwiched, where there's interesting stuff with her at the end as they do come back together, and at the beginning as she shows up for the first time. But I was like, we're watching her have that sequence in the car where they're having that conversation. He also finds her conversation intellectually stimulating. He can help her find a job. And I'm like, great, here's the B plot for that second half of the movie. And that is unfortunately not true. And I'm like, damn, I wanted to see that. And frankly, I kind of wanted to see it more than Laszlo. Laszlo's spiral is interesting, but I'm like, I'm more interested in what's going on with Erzsébet, frankly. Yeah. And also Zofia, who is a character that gets a lot of background play, but obviously not particularly much foregrounded in the narrative.
Yeah. I like I said, I think that Jones is good, and I can understand the decision to not like give her a B plot, as it were, because Laszlo is really like the immigrant experience of the movie. So perhaps it would have felt, I don't know, a bit like covering already trodden ground by doing a story with Jones or doing a story with Erzsébet. But I think there's more opportunity for her, period, regardless, no matter how you kind of utilized her. And I just don't understand people being like, well, Jones felt a little out of her depth in this movie. I just can't, bemoan that kind of stuff. Anyway, so now is when we have sort of already talked about it, that Erzsébet's arrival sort of gives a little fuel to the fire of Laszlo, or perhaps it is simply that the construction process is in progress.
I think it's that.
Yeah. That he is like, my project is being realized on a scale that even my past projects have not. And it is at the same time trying to be foisted away from him a little bit. At the presence of this American architect, Jim, I think he says, who they continually, or Laszlo, I guess, continually makes fun of him for like, well, what have you built? He's like, well, I've built a bowling alley. And he's
no, he built a strip mall or something.
Yeah.
The bowling alley was what Laszlo was building with the church or something, I guess, before he got the bigger project.
Okay, yeah. But he sort of makes fun of him as like, this guy's...
that is ugly is your fault.
Yes.
Oh, dude. That is the rarest insult known to man. That was a crazy
everything
moment.
That is ugly, useless, cruel, but most importantly, ugly is your fault.
It's your fault. Dude, crazy moment.
Yeah. But yeah, he is belittling this guy for being, you and I are not on the same level. You may think that we are just because Harrison brought you in to like keep me in check, but we are not doing the same things. I am operating on a much higher intellectual, artistic level than you could ever dream of. And he resents this fact that Jim is giving these notes. I love that moment where he walks into the like little field office and he sees the new schematics on the wall. And he takes a red pen and he draws on it. And he's like, now they're mine again. He takes 3 feet off the top. I added to the bottom. Which also goes back to the epilogue and Zofia explaining what the monument really represents for Laszlo, and why it's so important that it is to his exact specifications, to his exact design as an artist, because it is meaningful to him outside of being this weird conglomeration of different things for the community of Doylestown. It really is more of an artistic statement for Laszlo at the end of the day.
I want to take us back to A-Push for those of us who took A-Push.
Okay, here we go.
High school.
I did not. I was not smart enough.
I had to do a quick Google because I couldn't remember the name, but I was thinking, where is this big megastructure that contains these academic, these physical, these spiritual places? Literally located. It's literally located on a hill. Like a city on a hill.
Yeah,
like
Shining
the
City on the
sermon
Hill. Yes.
Given by John Winthrop, who I couldn't remember the name of.
John Winthrop.
The Shining City on the Hill.
The
America
beacon
should be the Shining City on
a hill. Not just America. Boston.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
It was originally Boston, but then I'm just at this point I'm robbing from the Wikipedia because I'm at the decrepit age of 24. So what I learned when I was 17 is fucking way out of my mind here.
Yeah.
But the city on the hill was initially applicable to Boston, but then became more largely a sort of symbol for American exceptionalism and the idealized culture that America would come to create. John Winthrop, this derives from the Sermon on the Mount. It's intrinsically Christian. It's from this early era of America being settled.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's this tension in the second half of the narrative where this literal city on the hill, again, is being built by this foreigner. To speak again about the architecture, because we touched on it a little bit, but the brutalism, the use of this concrete material, it's this sort of evocation of reverence, but not through these more traditionally affluent materials. There's no marble. There's none of the stuff that in the first half of the narrative, the advisor, the Van Buren wants to use. We're going to use concrete, this very proletarian material, and it's practical. It's unlike anything else that has been built around it. It's unlike what the Van Burens would build otherwise. It doesn't have the signature markers that you might associate with Van Buren flexing his ability to pursue the American exceptionalist construction of this
newly
building.
Built New York industry was all, what's the style of, what's like the Chrysler building? What's that called again?
Gothic Revival?
Art Deco, yes.
Art Deco, yeah.
Yeah, it's
like Bioshock.
It is not that. It's almost the opposite of that, where it's like not
100%.
Focused on outward beauty.
So what we have in the second half is we have this, as this city on the hill is being built, we have these figures who want to control it. And then one of these figures is Laszlo, this foreigner. And the Van Burens being anti-Semitic should not come as a surprise to anybody watching this movie.
Right.
But it becomes far more open-faced in the second half of the narrative, and it begins early on with the whole flicking of a coin across the table to Laszlo and insulting the fact that he speaks like he still shines shoes.
Yeah.
And it goes into what you're saying about this relationship with this American architect. and then it also goes into Joe Alwyn's character,
Yeah.
the younger Van Buren, who says that Laszlo is simply tolerated, and says basically, I want to fuck your niece.
Yeah.
And wouldn't we all love a woman that we could just have sex with that doesn't say anything ever?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It becomes very clear that suddenly the man building your city on the hill is not the man you want to control it.
He is
And
not
what
the
happens when you
figurehead.
lose control of him?
We need, Van Buren's name needs to be on the building, but I don't know, even Laszlo exerting his control over the designs is quickly becoming too much for the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants to really condone any further.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like what you've brought up about the importance of brutalist architecture in terms of larger themes, but I think it's also really interesting in terms of characterization for Laszlo, because this is not as much of a part of the movie as I guess I wanted it to be, or I think it could deserve, but he has a really unique relationship with the concept of beauty. And I find it as an element of his character as an artist to be compelling, but also because to me it's one of the more off-putting elements of him as a character. He has this reaction when he shows up at the furniture shop, of which there's a bunch of handmade furniture that clearly a lot of time and effort has been put into. And he's like, none of this is beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting juxtaposition, because to that point, we've seen his cousin and his wife be very gracious to him, and the room is very brightly lit, and this is a very like welcoming place for him to be in, especially as he's surrounded by brown furniture and things that are traditionally associated with like homey American life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says these things are not beautiful, and then transitions into designing very modernist, very simplistic stark designs that no one else really knows what to do with, but obviously he's very proud of. And that does blossom further into the next step, which is the library that he designs, which is like literally empty except for one chair sitting in the middle. And then, of course, the final architecture. I wish there was I guess there is a name. I don't really remember it, but like whatever that structure is called. Of course, that's the big structure, the things you're working on. I just call it like the Brutalist Castle. I don't know.
It's like Van Buren Center for something.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess sure. Yeah, but so that is just big gray squares, and except for this cross on the roof is, I mean, it's imposing, but it is not in most traditional senses visually attractive. And I find his relationship.
Think about the cross on the roof, though. If we're going to really dive into the architectural meaning, the cross is not on the roof. The cross is the negative space created by these pillars that surround it. You see a cross in the image of the building, but the cross is not built by the building. It is what's remaining, or what's
the absence of the cross.
The absence
That's
of the
right.
cross
is what implies Christianity.
Yeah.
I don't know, but to the point that I was making,
that's true as hell these days.
Yeah.
Oh, so true.
Whoa,
Yeah,
dude.
man. Yeah.
But to the point of it being an element of his character that I find a little bit alienating is him as an artist being so in his own mindset of what he finds to be appealing, and will deny the input of others and will besmirch the work of others. I find that to be very much in a Lydia Tarr way, like the thing that alienates him from others, the thing that pushes him away from others, because he's so in his own artistic mindset that he is unable to recognize the beauty in other things, and will insult the work of other creators. I mean, I to be honest, the like architectural element of this film really did key me into like the work that I'm not familiar with and have no idea how it goes, of someone designing any kind of architecture, even just a simple building, to the point you made earlier of him shitting on the guy for not having made anything. It's like, well, that guy built a bunch of stuff that people use every day. That's not easy work, and it still is artistry in its own way. But I'm also I'm very nebulous when it comes to art and like trying to respect a bunch of artistic things. But like, I found his Laszlo's perspective of someone who's so in his own mindset of the way he views art to be like a really like, I guess, dark element of his character that focuses him so hard in that he's pushes him away from relating to others.
I think that
I think
this
it's important to
brutalist
note, though,
art. Well, go ahead, Tanner.
what I was going to say is, I think it's important to note, however, that we come to realize that it wasn't just a narcissistic pursuit, unless you count all art as all auteur art as like narcissistic pursuits. But like it's a monument to like him and his wife and the connection that they shared even during the Holocaust and everything. Like that is why he was looking to be uncompromising in his vision, outside of being this brilliant architect who is respected in many circles, who feels he is being discounted now by these white Americans coming in, and they aren't respecting him. They're treating him just as like a pet necessarily, or like an oddity to come in and try and build this new structure. He resents them for that fact and for trying to impose upon this vision that he hasn't told anybody, because he knows that they would never allow him to do that if he said it outright.
Well, because what I'm going to say is the vision is outright, is that brutalist architecture, especially in the way that the epilogue frames it, is directly taking from fascist architecture of the Nazis. And so if you just think about what the like bunkers and stuff on the west coast of France, like on the Normandy beaches, looked like and what they were made out of, it's the same thing. It's concrete, rebar, squares, thick walls, imposing structure. And so that like visual similarity, but the use is so different between these places. And I think that's what part of brutalism as a whole, but also like this specific incarnation of it is getting at, that like you can make a very beautiful and a very useful and reverent space out of this very cold and harsh material. At least the way I read brutalism as a whole, as like an architectural movement, as is like it's the warmth of humanity, and it's the warmth of activity, and it's the warmth of the reason for the building existing that makes it,
it is
lovely and beautiful and a place to be in, not necessarily the aesthetics of the building, even though some brutalists, I will just put my hat in this ring, do make very beautiful buildings. This one is a little hard to qualify as beautiful, especially on those wide shots.
Does somebody even say in the movie the classic, form follows function? Is that stated in the movie?
I feel like it is.
There's also the quote that it happens in that long conversation between Van Buren and Laszlo, where Laszlo says, best description of a cube is his appearance, or it's something along those lines. That is sort of like the key figure, the key
that like the use value of a place is very important, and to the brutalist, the guy in the movie, is much more important than what its aesthetic.
The philosophy of brutalism is exactly what you said, Timo. That like what happens there, the use, the function of the building is far more important than outwardly what it gives off.
Yeah.
I'm interested in many, many, many more things in this movie.
Okay.
However, I want to talk about one more thing that takes us to the end of the movie, just because I think it's important to the structure of the building itself.
Mm-hmm.
After Erzsébet has confronted the Van Buren family, and this is obviously a scene and a dimension of the film we need to talk about more thoroughly.
Yes.
We go out looking for Van Buren, who, after being confronted with the fact that he did indeed rape Laszlo, he disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And we end the second half of the narrative and go into the epilogue on this very interesting image and this very interesting shot of the moonlight bringing the cross down onto this big piece of marble.
Mm-hmm.
The piece of marble that they went to Italy to go get.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then we pan the camera up, because of the way that the building is built to have the cross facing the right direction when viewed from the ground. The cross, as is centered in the frame and the movie, is upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Statue of Liberty
Again,
parallel?
Deep.
The Brutalist is not operating with visual language that is subtle, but I think it's operating with visual language that is so effectively shot and so effectively conveyed to the audience that I'm just sort of in awe of it, because I also think that this is a movie that is so dense with so many character relationships and so many plot points that it's okay to say we just have this image at the end. And there's this, I think, this real compelling idea that the upside down cross, this sort of archetypal American Christian hierarchy, has been upended. In fact,
it's really apocryphal. It'd be like flipping the Statue of Liberty upside down, honestly.
I think it, to me, speaks to the strength of the Brutalist in the way that I think you can even draw a comparison between the deftness of the imagery to the deftness of the architectural style of Brutalist.
Yes,
itself.
I mean, this was kind of going to be my closing note, so I'll wait till then. But I'll just wait till then. So we should talk about the moment when Van Buren and Laszlo go to Italy to. Laszlo wants to basically prove this point to Van Buren that, like, it is important that we get this specific marble. Let me show you the significance of it. The materials are important to the architectural style. And Van Buren is very flippant about all this stuff. He is quite racist towards the Italian man that meets them. And of course, they are walking through this like marble quarry, and the Italian man, a close friend of Laszlo's for many years, is talking about how, like, during the war, the rebels in Italy against Mussolini's government, like, hid in this quarry and used the marble to, like, kill the fascist soldiers that were hunting them down and everything. And then there was, of course, the moment during like a party within the mines of this quarry where Laszlo is raped by Harrison. In a moment that we've talked about already.
Laszlo.
Yes.
Nice passive voice, my man.
Oh, sorry, my mistake. In a moment that we talked about already, that is clearly, even the lines that Harrison is given during the act are very like, I am imposing you think you can, like, get one over on me. I'm showing you what the power that I have over you is effectively what that moment is. And then we are meant to understand that Laszlo was in a sort of drug-induced stupor and maybe doesn't recall this moment that well. The morning after, as they sort of pick out the stone and then depart.
There's one other thing in that dialogue, though, that I think is really key. Harrison is talking about Jewish people as a monolith who don't make use of their I'm forgetting the exact quote, but it's like they don't make use of the resources they have, or they squander the resources they have.
Oh yeah, like if because it's like the way you portray yourself is what contributes to you being treated poorly.
Yeah, okay,
if you didn't want to be treated poorly, you shouldn't be poor or bad or whatever he says.
100%. I mean, and it's such a key point, and it does open up, I think, the part of the conversation about the Brutalist that I don't feel like I have enough information, frankly, to really get into.
I tend to agree.
Which is what this film is trying to say about Israel.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a key part of the film, that we are introduced to the creation of Israel as a nation in the first half of the film. And then we have the character of Zofia, who is going to Israel. We have this closing note at the end of the film that it's not don't let anybody fool you into thinking it's the journey. What matters is indeed the destination. And when you take all of these things in the context of this assertion on behalf of Harrison, this deeply anti-Semitic, obviously physically violent, most violating thing he can do, it feels to me as though the Brutalist is trying to say that there is an irreconcilable cultural, religious, insert idea, divide here, in that leaving the United States for Israel is the solution. Now, I just don't personally feel like I have enough information and a broad enough scope of knowledge to comment on that further. I just think that that's what the pieces of the movie say, And I think it's a critical part of the conversation about the Brutalist that people who've gotten this far in the review should go look for other voices on,
Yeah.
I think.
Probably Jewish voices on it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was
There have
really
been many people talking about that. Yeah.
I echo your sentiment a lot, Abram, that I think it's all there and I have my opinions of Israel, but like, you know, this is a different time period. This is a different
Yeah.
there's just a lot more and it's just so much
Yeah.
just so much more complicated coming out of the Holocaust. And so I seek further input from those who know more
And,
for that section.
Of course, the issues of Israel as a state and Israel-Palestine relations and the conflict therein have been around for years and years. But it's worth noting that this film wasn't written last year. This film was written 7 years ago, and so the current news cycle was not on the mind of Courbet and Vastfold when they were writing this moment.
Mhm.
Sure.
But I think it really does just boil down to a lot of these things are addressed in a more ambiguous way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you are a Jewish person living in America of the time, you would think this way about things. I don't think that
Yeah,
I
of
don't
course.
think that Courbet is trying to make commentary on Israel as a state necessarily.
Well, I think he is, but I just don't think it's like as of the moment necessarily as our current mindset might like try to read into it. But I think they're definitely because that point is brought up numerous times. One actually element of the filmmaking here that I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that I think is actually clever and very strong is the use of radio and news across
Yeah.
different sequences of the
Mhm.
film as we're watching just different montages and we're passing time between sequences and news of different political elements and cultural elements of the time is being shared. And obviously there is this news thing that is someone I think in Israel like telling like sharing that this nation has been created and there's like an American radio voice saying like this is something that we support. And but then there's also the because I noticed I know this is something that showed up multiple times, the element of opium being a new drug that people can use in medical ways, and obviously that is brought back later as the heroin addiction element of the film is explored more going forward. But I think that element of using radio and news at key points throughout the film to hint at things that are going to become relevant later is actually very subtle, because you might just think that it's just background noise at first until you are keyed in later to it actually being very important. And I think that's a really clever filmmaking decision that I really appreciated.
Yeah, Courbet is obviously interested in the world building, and that's why he uses those segments. I would say that my reading of it is that that's the opposite of subtle. He deploys it when he's like, this is something that you need to know about.
Yeah.
This is the state of Israel is a thing, and of course if you're a Jewish American of the time, you would know about these things and people would be talking about them to you. So for modern
the state
American
of Pennsylvania
audiences,
is a thing, and you need to know that the most
steel is
important
the best
material
thing.
in the world
Yeah.
comes from Pennsylvania.
the reason
Well,
it's important the story is taking place here is because this is the
ironic
heart
propaganda.
of industry.
Yes, yeah.
The reason I would disagree about it being like aggressively unsubtle is because this is radio. This is not people. This is not the characters talking about this. And then, of course, the Israel thing they do later with Zofia, but like these radio things are not like people in a room talking about this. This is like this could have been another movie. It could have been like background noise. It could be news about anything like that. Like over a transition
Pennsylvania stuff
period.
It's cut right into the film. It's
Yeah,
not
it's a
occurring-
newsreel that we
I
see.
think there's one example that to me highlights, Tucker, why I agree with you in terms of the effect of the technique, but why I agree with Tanner and Timo in terms of the subtlety of the technique.
Sure.
It's the part about addiction to H.
Yeah.
Let's just leave it there.
as to hop, as he calls it. I'd never heard that one
As
before.
hop, yes.
Oh.
Well, because nobody's called heroin
We made a
hop
movie
in a
about
very
that.
long
the
time.
people, Timo, the people in your circles don't call it hop.
They don't
anymore.
call it hop anymore.
It's so
that what
last
the
People in
Illumination
my
movie's
circles
about?
that do heroin.
Yes.
Can you name them? I can't.
Laszlo, one of them is sitting on this call right now. Laszlo he's on a bender and he's been shooting up and he's been smoking and he ends up in a porn theater.
Mhm.
And then he gets kicked out for trying to sleep in the porn theater. And as he's sort of walking in this misanthropic way, smoking his cigarette, down this empty street, like coming down from this bender, the radio goes, and there's people who do drugs.
Yeah.
Now
And so I
let me
think
be
this is-
clear.
Yeah.
When I say it's not subtle, I don't mean to say it's not good. I think
agree.
it
Of
is
course.
it is
Yeah.
effectively deployed in the movie,
I
but
agree.
in not in ways that I would describe as subtle. Brady Corbet is like, this is something that I would like to inform the audience about, so I will inject it right into the film.
Well, okay. I feel like I just need to like express this a little bit
Okay.
clearer because there have been many movies with transitionary moments between sequences in which there's news playing or something, and it's just that's when you turn your brain off. That's between the sequences. It's between there's other characters on screen. Like so, when I was listening, I was listening. I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but like, I don't know if it'll come back later. Like this happens in plenty of movies, whatever. But I think what makes it unsubtle is then reaffirming that later on.
Sure.
That I mean, I don't know. I thought it was clever because a lot of movies will use that montage transitionary sequence as just like fluff world building, whatever. But this is very explicitly about things that aren't explored as deeply in other parts of the film, but I think are core to the identity of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's clever insofar as that it characterizes what is, I think, I mean, the movie feels so subjective for large portions of it. I think that this very objective radio presence is quite a useful tool in the film.
Yeah.
Mhm.
As the one other thing I'll just say to close the book on the part of the narrative as it relates to whether or not Courbet is attempting to comment on Israel is I think
Mhm.
that an ineffective portion of the movie is the discussion at the dinner table with Zofia, her husband,
Yeah.
and then Erzsébet and Laszlo, where I think we attempt to create some sort of like spectrum of opinion on the role of what it means to be Jewish and what it means
when
to live
Laszlo
in.
says, "Are we not Jews?" When they are like saying that we're going to move to Israel because that's the place for Jewish people now.
That's
Yeah,
like
and
the
so I-
Shylock quote.
Yeah, it's.
am I
I
not a
think it's.
man?
I think it's not super effective, frankly.
Because I don't know what
like,
I don't know what it gets at. That's why I think
Yeah.
it's not super effective. Like,
And this is why I say that I feel this sort of aspect of the film is quite ambiguous. And Courbet has come out and said more broadly about this film, this being a Jewish story. He's like, I am not Jewish. I am, I kind of left this to the interpretation of other folks on the creative team of Adrian Brody, who has this sort of heritage. But he's been very adamant about the fact that like I am not trying to like tell this story as if it were personal to me by any means.
And
Okay.
I think that often works, but I think that in this particular element it doesn't. But again, it also is due to an out of a fact of life that Courbet had to face when this movie released this year,
Yeah.
right?
mhm.
Even if it was really written a decade ago, the genocide in Gaza is not going to leave my mind when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
And really my whole view of this part and why I advocate for people to read other perspectives is that I think it would be very reductionist to apply an in the moment reading of Israel to what this film is trying to say. I just think
Yes.
that
Yeah, I
the
agree.
film is not particularly good at trying to depict or bring into conversation different viewpoints on Israel. I think it has a reading, and then I think it grasps at others that I just think is sort of ill-conceived, basically, because it feels like it's one more thing than the film can manage at the end of the day.
I would have put a pin in that because it'll be sort of key to my final thoughts on the movie.
Because we're hitting about the intermission of the
Yeah.
movie right now
So-
on the runtime of this one, but we continue. Nothing's
I have a
stopping
quick
us.
question for the three of you, interpretation moment, and then we can talk epilogue and wrap up.
Sure,
Wicked.
Van Buren killed himself, right?
totally, absolutely,
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And I think a moment of tact, a moment of wit in the film to heavily imply that this is happening and to never confirm it, because I don't know the conclusion. I think it's obvious. The reaction, the
Okay.
act, and we were talking earlier. I had this idea that it's for Van Buren, it's appearances and the
Yep.
appearance of
Absolutely.
having Erzsébet come into that room and curse him out and say that he is a rapist. That is reconcilable with his image
And
of
then
himself
having
and
the
his
reaction
image of
from-
what his family's reaction is. Because their reaction
having
is not.
Joe Ellen drag her out of the room, kicking and screaming. He's like, "This is I can't have this. This cannot stand. My image is ruined, essentially." And that's all he's concerned about.
Yeah. And so thus he must get rid of his image by killing himself.
Yeah.
Or because he knows that he's got this monument that has been sort of half finished at this point. That'll be around when he's dead.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to point out to circle back sort of to the thing I was saying about Laszlo's relationship to beauty, and then also the brutalist architecture of this unfinished structure. I think it's actually an interesting creative choice to obviously never finish the project. Or I mean, I guess it might have been
finishes.
later on.
Yeah,
we
but
learned that
don't
it was
see
finished
it.
way after the fact. It's finished in the 70s,
exactly.
I think they say.
And we never see it be used by the public for its intended function. We never see it treated with any kind of a Christian reverence.
The only time we really
see
it is when we're wandering around in the basement and it's full of water.
Yeah,
and
looking for Van Buren's body.
That's the key point. This place is never shown to be beautiful. This place is there's never beautiful light coming through and like all this stuff. Even with the brutalist architecture, which could be portrayed in that way, this is a place of mud, a place of work, a place of half-finished ideas and conflict, and a flooded basement, and these dark hallways that are like it's like Caligari or Nosferatu. Like this is like terrifying puzzle of places, and I think that's a really interesting way to show like this project is obviously Laszlo's goal to finish this. It's something that he's putting a lot of himself into, but it also is that building is the core of all of the conflict in this movie, and the people taking advantage of one another, and his relationship not working because he's so focused on it. It is a nightmarish cesspool of all of the bad things that happen in this movie are focused and centered around this one thing, and never showing it as a completed place of worship, of community, I think is the final nail. Because as we learned, it was used as that presumably, but never showing that, I think, is a very strong creative expression of the harm that this place has caused to so many people.
And correct me if I am misremembering, but when they show it at the end, they call it like the Doylesville Community Center. The Van Buren name is not on it. I don't remember.
I think you're right.
Huh.
Yeah.
Because it's initially supposed to be the Maggie Van Buren Center or whatever. It's dedicated to his mother, and then you're right at the end, in the epilogue, it's not.
Yeah. So this epilogue takes place in Venice in the year 1980, and the presentation it's sort of a commemorative, a lifetime achievement award for Laszlo Toth, and it's called like Presence of the Past or something like that. And it is in this moment where Sophia comes out and really kind of says like, my uncle had all of these different ideas going into this, and obviously he came from this fraught time, and the entire structure, the structure that was long gestating and only was completed a couple of years ago, had this hidden meaning to it that he wanted in it from the very beginning. That it was he and my aunt were kept in separate concentration camps, but they felt they were connected. This thing that Felicity Jones says earlier in the movie, they felt that they were connected over all these years, and so all the different rooms, the different compartments, even though they served different purposes, were all interconnected through labyrinthine systems down in the basements and everything like that. And those are the flooded rooms that Tucker was talking about that we see. That's really all that we see of the interior of this building is these labyrinthine systems. And that is, to me, sort of key to the art and artists. And this movie is about making art, especially coming from a director who has sort of narrativized the whole film and its existence in the awards race as a talking point as well. But is there anything you guys want to mention about the epilogue as it exists at the end?
There's some really interesting filmmaking choices in the epilogue.
Sure.
Where we almost move between what's like a TV like a TV.
Yeah, it
recording.
feels filmically the stock or whatever is used is very different than what's been used for the past 3.5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I really think that absolute closing note of it's not that don't let anybody fool you into thinking it's the journey. It is indeed the destination
yeah.
that matters. I think that really builds nicely on what both Tucker was explaining about what we see the Doylesville Community Center as, and Tanner, what you're explaining.
hmm
I think that to me it kind of cinches everything together. It
Yeah.
cinches all of these thematic ideas, all these plot ideas together, and it kind of completes the vision that I was expressing at the very first thing I said in this review, of this idea of showing this American dream, and this American culture, and then watching it crumble,
hmm
and sort of juxtaposing that journey against the destination. And I think having the viewer put those in conversation,
Yeah.
I think it's a very, very, very effective epilogue.
I think so too. Even like this assertion that it is the destination is like railing against the lie told by like the controlling interest, the capitalist interest of America, that's like, hey, you poor people, as long as you just keep working, you'll get here eventually. And it's just laying, keeping on laying the track down in front of you. Is like, no, Laszlo was always focused on one end goal, and as much as people tried to steer him away from that or sort of divert his destination, change it, alter it, he was dogged in his assertion that like, this is what I want to complete. This is the way I'm going to get it. And I'm going to get there one way or another. But what's important to me is finishing the project. And it eventually does get finished in the way that he wanted it to.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's a little tell, not show. The epilogue functions in a kind of a clunky narrative way for me, even though I actually really appreciate what you guys are saying about its thematics, and I agree that that's what its function is in the film, but it is off-putting to me in its like directness, and it's just like telling you this stuff, and the film having gone on so long, and it's right at the end, like it's ended, and we get a title card saying that this is the epilogue. Showing all these shots of this Venetian architecture as opposed to this brutalist architecture that we were looking at earlier. I don't know. It's kind of like a middling effectiveness for me because of
Sure.
the heavy reliance on just talking to us. But
Yeah. I think that combined with how jarring it is,
Yeah.
it does feel like more is going to happen when we've had this whole confrontation and we're running around, we're looking for Harrison, and at this point we actually haven't seen Laszlo in like 10 minutes of the movie,
it's
and
a little weird.
It's like there's a lot of narrative threads to tie up here, and then we hard cut to we've not found Harrison, and then it's 30 years later the thing has been finished. I believe we don't see her. I assume that Elizabeth has passed away at some point. They might mention that.
Sophia says that.
And we don't hear anything from Laszlo, though he's there and he's a lot older than like 20 years would have made him look.
It's really a question of like, how old is he supposed to be by the end of like the second part? Yeah, he's got a little gray in his hair, I guess.
But I think that it's interesting thematically, but I think Timo's right. It kind of fast forwards through a lot of things that I think would have been interesting to see like genuinely wrapped up, and then just kind of like puts a button on the end of the movie before I feel like it's ready to be wrapped up. And I'm like, oh, wow.
So what you're saying is that we could add an hour of runtime.
Unironically, Timo, the movie needs to be longer, and I will stand
think this
by
movie
this.
could
I
be
will die,
longer.
I will die on this hill that this movie needs to be at least 20 minutes, probably 30 minutes long at minimum, to make this ending feel a little bit more earned. Maybe not earned, but like just a little bit less like, oh, we're wrapping it up now. Especially for a film that goes and goes and goes and doesn't exactly plod along, but feels very deliberate.
Yeah.
Especially as we know that Courbet got final cut on this film. It's not like he was forced to cut anything out of this ending by A24 or the financiers of the film. I do wonder what the creative decision making was behind like going from, because what's the scene before Erzsébet's confrontation with Harrison? Is it them in bed together following
it's when
her
she-
like use
It's a
first use of
hospital.
heroin.
It's, yeah, when he takes her.
Oh, the
It's the
hospital.
hospital.
You're
Yeah.
right. You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like Ersepet's first using of heroin. She overdoses. They go to the hospital, and then an undisclosed amount of time passes, and she's like, I'm gonna blow this whole relationship up. Martin, Van Buren, you raped my husband, and then it's the epilogue.
Yeah.
It's very. I don't know. It feels a little bit odd to me, and maybe that's
Mhm.
also why I came out of it with a little bit of like a wanting for more. Maybe it simply is that, but to sort of put a bow around my entire thoughts on the film, I opened it up saying, my opening thoughts saying that I wish there were more for me to chew on, and we chewed on plenty in this episode. We chewed on
a
in
lot.
this review, but I think it's more just that like I wish I had more questions coming out of it, not just questions about like, well, why did it end like that, but questions about what Courbet is trying to say, because I feel like I have a very clear understanding of what he's trying to say, the allegory that he's making of the artist and the controlling capitalist interests, and the art trying to be compromised by those interests, and the artist bravely fighting against things, and how that can, sort of corrupt the personal relationships that he has. I think it's all right there for you. I've read some other interpretations. I think Sean Fennessy, shout out Sean Fennessy of The Ringer, has this very interesting thing that he notes upon in one of his Letterboxd reviews, that like perhaps Zofia is the key to all of this. She is the opening and closing of the film. She is the last voice that we hear of the film. Is this her like retelling of her uncle's story, and that's why the film is as it is. But again, I don't think there's enough material in the rest of the film to support, at least how I see it, those other interpretations. I think it is, for better or worse, a very Courbet, like, this is me, I am an important director, I am tired of compromising to the moneyed interest when it comes to the meeting of art and commerce. I'm tired of these compromises that I must make. And so I'm going to air them in this film that are how important and how parasitic that relationship can be.
Mhm.
I feel like it's all there for you, and it's executed very beautifully. I mean, we didn't even talk about like the cinematography or the music or the editing, for that matter.
I did not realize that he did Vox Lux with Natalie Portman.
Yes.
I hated that movie.
And I've not seen his other work either. But to harkening back to a thing that I said earlier, it doesn't need to be subtle for it to be good. But I don't know. I preferred Megalopolis, which is a movie that's also about this effectively. And I think it's just because the spin, the take there is a little bit more interesting. The interpretation of the messaging there is a little bit more interesting, especially coming from Francis Ford Coppola, who has been making a lot more movies for a lot longer than Brady Corbet has. So I don't know. It all feels just a little bit underwhelming to me, especially as Corbet pitched it as the great American new epic. Or I guess maybe he didn't, but A24 did.
Yeah, the marketing
gurus
did.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, the question that I have is what is this film's pertinence? Why does this film matter right now? And I think like the Kane comparison to Citizen Kane, Orson Welles, is we think that movie is like a period piece because we watch it and it's old. But it's not a period piece. It's a contemporary piece. It's about contemporary issues with contemporary settings and costumes and set and all that. So this one, by being a period piece, does not bring that immediate pertinence by having it just exist within the world that we know, despite it being the foundation of the world that we know. And I think that's part of what this film is trying to get at, is the building and the birth of modern America. And we live in the middle or towards the end or somewhere in modern America. This one, by being cast back in the past, doesn't hit as close to home as a film like Honora does, which is just slamming on the realities of life today, which I think is something that I look for. And now I think you could just as fine do that in a period piece. But my issues with not being able to quite grok all that this film is like getting at and all that this film is like saying leads me to feel a lack of pertinence to its story, that it does matter and it is impactful, but it isn't all that. And I think that other
I'd be happy to
films.
see this win Best Picture. I will say that.
Yeah, I mean,
I think-
they could pick it.
What I would say to close out is that to me, I think about the idea of like the notion that America is a melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the fact that we're recording this on Inauguration Day, and Trump has promised that he's going to start mass deportation by the time I wake up tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think about the way that in the current moment of American culture and politics, there is this authoritarian, white identity-based reclamation of America. And this is not what The Brutalist is about in specific, but I think what The Brutalist is seeding is this long-standing idea that I think is coming to an overt head about the relationship or the perceived dues or relationship between this sort of class attempting to grasp onto an idea of America, a religious idea, a social idea, a political idea of America that is changing for the better, but is changing not to the betterment of these people who want to retain a control. So I guess sort of my difference in opinion is that personally, I just don't really view this as being abstracted about filmmaking almost at all.
Mm.
And I see this as much more of a perennial and prescriptive look at the relationships between classes and cultures within America. And I think that through that lens, at least for myself, there's a lot to get into. And I think that, not that we're going to do it now because we're pushing 2 hours, but I think that there's even more to get into through this lens, particularly about the drug use. And
Particularly,
that is a huge thing that, again, I just implore people to go look at other sources about, and I'm going to be doing the same
from drug users.
Yeah.
Well, we got one on the we gotta
say who, but somebody
user.
The H user.
So I guess where I leave it ultimately is that where I think you sort of see a narrowness, Tanner, I see sort of a couple different interlocking interpretations that for me give it more play. And it's a sort of movie that I left similar to like when I saw Drive My Car for the first time and did it for Quest. And I thought to myself, well, I feel like my next viewing of The Brutalist is going to be quite...
That's the real one.
I really have an inclination that I do want to see it again. I likely will. But yeah, and Abram, you're probably exactly right that I'm looking at it through too narrow of a lens. But I just think that you can't, especially with all that Corbet has based his campaign around, sort of divorce that reading from the film.
The last thing I want Tucker to close it out while we get our scores. But I will also note that I'm the least Oscars connected of you three.
Sure.
So I just generally know The Brutalist as a thing that is up for a lot of awards.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how it's positioned, which is definitely coloring my perspective differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like this movie a lot. I think it's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I think it is one of the movies that does, for me, the best with its 3.5 hour runtime. I usually feel like movies don't earn that. But for a film as tight and specific as it is, I actually think I agree with Tanner here. I think it is very, like, surprisingly focused in its narrative. I found that to be very compelling. And I also think that it's a film where I really appreciated being given the chance to watch this on the big screen in the theater. That its scale feels epic once it's put on the big screen, and especially the score as it's pounding over these montages, I think are really powerful moments. And it's one that I think I will grow to appreciate more in the future. This first watch, I really enjoyed it. It left my mind a little bit quicker, but talking about this, I'm like, yeah, I remember basically everything that happened in this movie, which is not a compliment necessarily because I just watched it 4 days ago, but it's an insult to me is what I'm saying. Oh. But I think it's really quite a remarkable film, and especially that a film of this production value, of this scope, of this runtime, was produced for as cheaply as it is and put out in the modern movie marketplace that people could
less than $10 million.
Yeah, like it doesn't make any sense.
I love that. That's awesome.
But
that's cool.
It is a really bold moment in the modern theatrical landscape, especially when people say movies like this aren't made anymore, and largely that's true. But watching this movie be made again, with every large statistic that we pointed out, it's like it was made for cheaply and it is going to be massively profitable because of that. I think it's just it's awesome. It like literally it's an awesome film.
That's true. Thank you.
Especially for me
Yeah.
with the score. Like I was sitting there and like
awesome.
I am transcending above the clouds right now as it is happening.
And you know,
I do think
I couldn't even really tell that they used AI to redo the Hungarian lines.
I thought we'd get through it. I thought we'd get through they litigated all this. I
don't really actually think there's much to say because if I'm gonna get on my high horse about AI and audio technology, all your stupid AI models come from audio at the very beginning because Dolby's algorithms to reduce noise are some of the earliest forms of machine learning that we had ever created as humans. So it's kind of like, yes, it's a weird thing, but yes, it's also part of the technology and it has been for a long time. Like technically the noise reduction programs that I use on this very podcast are AI and they're processed. Like it's not like I'm redoing the voices, but it's like, I don't know. It's a tool. It's a tool.
It didn't compromise Courbet's vision, and they didn't take anybody's job, and that is the two important things, and also the two things that relate directly to what this movie is about.
Yeah.
Okay, we're officially over 2 hours. Tanner, give us your quick predictions for this.
Okay, one second. So obviously, this film is going to be nominated for Best Picture. It will probably also be nominated for Director, Best Actor for Adrian Brody, Best Supporting Actor for Guy Pearce. Best Original Screenplay. Oh, I should notice. Maybe Best Supporting Actress for Felicity Jones. We'll see. Original Screenplay, yes. Cinematography, yes. Production Design, yes. What else? Score, yes.
Wicked. But not as many nominations as our next movie, right, Tanner?
Oh, well, let's get a score out. Let's get a score out there first.
Put your scores in. Put them in.
Put your popcorn.
Put them in. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Boom.
Yep.
Boom.
Sorry.
Whoa. Okay, we do not have a tie. It's very close, but wow.
Whew.
The Brutalist has a score of 8.9. 0.1
You
point.
guys should have liked Conclave more.
We should have liked Conclave more. The Brutalist is going to go at spot
hell,
number
guys?
1 above Conclave. There you have it, the point breakdown. Lest us not forget, I gave it an 8.0, then Tanner gave it an 8.9, Tucker gave it a 9.2, and Abram gave it a 9.5. So there you have it. Tanner, what film's going to get the most nominations, and which one are we going to watch next? And are they the same?
Well, yeah, they are the same, most likely. We'll be watching, we talked about, we saved the AI discourse right at the end, but thankfully this next film that we're talking about has no discourse surrounding it. It is, of course, Jacques Audiard's Amelia Perez.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Haven't seen it.
Streamable on the Netflix streaming service.
I have heard some...
I think it'll be an invigorating episode.
An invigorating episode. I've heard concerning things about this film. I've heard things that don't necessarily entice me to watch it. I've watched a clip posted over and over again on Twitter.
Can I guess what clip it is, Timo? Can I take a wild stab at what musical number
you do not need to guess. You already know.
Yes.
Yeah, so here, we're going to watch it for real, and then we're going to talk about it for real with the normal integrity that we give every
discussion
movie.
Of Amelia Perez on the internet. 4 cis white guys talking about Amelia Perez.
Yippee!
Hey, I've seen it. I don't think I would give it 12 nominations at the Oscars, but I also don't think Jacques Audiard should be tried at The Hague for his crimes against cinema. So I fall somewhere in between those two extremes.
Classic
I'll say
centrist Tanner giving us a little sneak peek for next time.
I'm personally hoping that I'm even outside the bounds.
that. I see. Okay, you're gonna go way beyond that. Interesting.
Shoot him into space.
Okay, all right.
No, I didn't say what side I was on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'll give it 24 nominations.
Oh my lord. However many nominations Tucker decides to give it, you gotta stay here on Backlot Banter to find out more. It's been a pleasure discussing this film. Longest episode ever. Good job, guys.
Yeah.
We will be next. Be up.
Is this our first 2 parts?
Yeah, it is. We'll be around for Amelia Perez. Until then, keep your eyes on the channel. And it really matters tonight because I'm turning into a popsicle. But really, stay warm and keep cool and peace.
No, Abram, no, please. You don't know. You don't know what that looks like.
Abram, I didn't hit record yet. You
People
can't
are-
say such things at all.
People are gonna
wait.
Abram, people are gonna misconstrue that. They're gonna take it all sorts of crazy directions.
I know. People just don't get it. It was an honest mistake.
It's an honest mistake. It's an honest mistake I made twice back to back.